There was organization that happened, but it wasn't for our cause. It was for the Democrats again. It was for back to brunch. Brunch was the goal, not communism. Sorry, I hate to put it so flagrantly, but that's it,
Yeah. Hello.
Hey.
Welcome to Left Unread. My name is Aaron.
I'm Will.
This is a podcast where two dudes engage in radical self-education.
We're just a worker and a peasant in an undetermined organizational structure, and this is Left Unread.
The less said about that book, the better, I'd say.
The Death Agony of Capitalism.
The title is the best part of the book.
I don't disagree with you. This week, we read...
Left-wing Communism and Infantile Disorder.
Infantile Disorder. I constantly have been thinking of that clip I sent you of the guy going, even Lenin was dealing with the wokes back in Leningrad. Yeah, by V.I. Lenin, you know the one. So, this book was written in 1920, right? Lenin in 1920. With the Russian Revolution in the rear view, Lenin and the Bolsheviks were now looking dominant in Russia. While the Russian Civil War was still technically ongoing, by this point, most of the white forces were in retreat. Faced with the quickly sputtering out idea of world revolution, Lenin was hard at work, focused on transitioning a nation torn by war towards the shaky goal of socialism in one country. Lenin's work on left-wing communism was in response to the purity-focused attitudes of communists around the globe, critiquing from Germany to America, Italy, and the Netherlands the isolationist attitudes of their respective communist groups.
Well said.
Yeah.
I love these intros you're writing.
Thanks!
Should we preface this by why we chose this work in particular?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably pretty obvious why we chose this work.
I think it will be obvious to certain communists, maybe not obvious to the audience that we are trying to speak to with this podcast.
That's fair and valid, yeah. If you might have heard it on the end of the last episode, but the reason I said this is because there is the chance to participate in bourgeois parliamentary democracy upcoming in the United States. It's something that I'm frankly quite sick of hearing discourse about because of one reason or the other. And I wanted to hear what the critical thinkers were thinking about that. And who better than the man, the myth, the legend, Lenin.
Nikolai Lenin.
Nikolai Lenin, as it says in your book and not mine. Mine says,
crazy.
Yeah. And it's the same, for the record, we are reading from the Martino Fine Books edition, 2018. Although I will say I looked on Marxist.org and it looks like the same one there, appendix and all. So if you want to read along with us, which hopefully you've already done in preparation for this discussion.
Yeah, and I think we probably came into this conversation with a different attitude, and I'm willing to bet still have a different attitude after reading Lenin's opinion.
Well, firstly, I'll say that this whole book is not only about participation in bourgeois parliamentary democracy. That's going to be a tongue twister this episode. It's about other things, including the trade union struggle, which I was interested to see. Mm-hmm. There is, of course, the polemical aspect, as is tradition for almost all of the Russian theory we've read so far, where he's critiquing someone else. In this case, many of the left parties in the Europe and otherwise.
There are appendices that specifically even address particular groups.
Really cracked me up the response from the Dutch Communist Party, where they were like, you can't hold us responsible for the actions of those members.
Yeah.
Thanks. It was like one paragraph. I don't know why they included that, I guess, just as some kind of rebuttal. But I don't know, man. We're obviously not full communist historians or anything, but I didn't know anything about the Dutch Communist Party. What's going on with them? What's up with the Netherlands?
Yeah, this is the running motif for the show up until this point, but I have zero context for what we're reading pretty much.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, just a great example of that is he doesn't actually talk anything about it. He just mentions Soviet Hungary in this, in the 1910s, there was a socialist Republican Hungary, right? There was something going on there. There was a workers type deal, a workers type beat. Maybe, according to Lenin, perhaps. I don't know. The thing is, it's odd that I haven't heard that mentioned anywhere else, really. I know that happened just like in history, but I haven't really read anything about it. And so I don't know if it's worth reading anything about.
Yeah, nor I. The historical context, while it might be helpful to contextualize the stuff that we're reading, has little bearing on my interpretation of the theory.
Yeah.
Perhaps the only place that it has merit, in my view, is in the applicability of the application of a particular bit of theory and seeing where things went right and wrong and, course correcting, doing some self-crit after that. But I don't know that I need to know much about the Dutch communist group in order to, swear my allegiance to ML communism,
ML Communism Jr. That's all I could think there. I'm sorry to say, if you're looking for a silver bullet here, Lenin's answer is it's complicated. Should the answer to should I do these things? It depends. Unfortunately, the reason I bring that up is because it has to do, especially with the historical context. I guess we can kind of jump into it a little here, but sure. One thing that Lenin says is that even though other countries will have to go through the same experience that the Russian Revolution had to go through, he says that the Russian Revolution only occurred because of very specific criteria. And looking at that criteria in the historical context, I think is really important because, it's not going to be the same kind of revolution. I mean, let me pull up where he says that. Yeah, because he talks about on this page, 47 actually.
47, okay.
Mm-hmm. Certain specific conditions existed in Russia which do not at present exist in Western Europe, and a repetition of such conditions in another country is not very probable, right? So, one, the possibility of connecting the Soviet Revolution with the conclusion, thanks to it, of the imperialist war, so they were at the end of World War I.
Yep.
That put them in a unique position because the war was initiated for Russia by the Tsar, right? Or by their alliance, I guess. And it was finished by the Soviets. So literally a difference in power. They had to seek a separate peace because even though the government changed, I don't think the Germans were planning on stopping. I don't actually know a lot about that, just to be completely frank, but that's one thing. Mm-hmm. Two, the possibility of making use for a certain time of the deadly struggle of two world powerful groups of imperialist plunderers who were unable to unite against their Soviet enemies. So the same thing, a separate peace. And the possibility of withstanding a comparatively lengthy civil war, partly because of the gigantic dimensions of the country. Yeah, so I mentioned in the introduction, right, at this point of writing, the white forces, the Tsarist forces, or I guess the non-communist forces, were in retreat, right? They were being pushed back. What I had read online is that it took another year or two to finally defeat them all the way because they literally had to push all the way across the breadth of Russia. And what Wikipedia at least defines as kind of the ending point is the capture of Vladivostok, which is literally on the eastern coast of Russia whole, Russia Great or whatever. And not to mention, too, that the actual landscape of the Soviet Union changed significantly from what it was as the Empire of Russia beforehand. The Baltic countries were all part of Russia, and then they became independent because of the war and what happened afterwards. So there's just a lot going on. But specific conditions to Russia, like he says, it's highly improbable that the same conditions happen again.
Yeah. The point that I had on 66 is similar, that the circumstances will certainly be different from one country to another that's looking to have a communist revolution take place, a proletarian revolution take place. But there is, if you kind of zoom out, there is still an underlying commonality, and he says that there needs to be some form of governmental crisis at play for a revolution to happen.
Sure.
He says that very plainly. He says that the workers should fully understand the necessity for a revolution and be ready to sacrifice their lives for it, and that the ruling class needs to be in a state of governmental crisis which attracts even the most backward masses into politics. Yeah. So a crisis that forces participation by the proletarian class. Yeah. That's the prerequisite. What that crisis is, in Russia, it was obviously the crisis of dealing with what was happening with World War I, but that crisis will be different from place to place. The important part, though, is that the ruling class be in that state of crisis.
Yeah, exactly. He says it could be, something like parliamentary deadlock. He could say it could be a colonial struggle. All of these things are still applicable, I would say. Mm-hmm. Even if we're thinking about just a great example. It's what's fucking happening in Israel right now. There's there's a chance of essentially colonial conflict happening, and I think it could drive some kind of issue to the forefront for a mass of people. Especially when it comes to the election. Just to kind of tie it back into our grander theme of this episode.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we should just jump right into that.
Yeah,
because I think that was the motive for us reading this. Yeah. Was, what does Lenin have to say about our participation in bourgeois parliamentarism?
Sorry if you're planning on not voting. I'll just say it now, because that's the position that I'm taking, is that It's vote blue no matter who. And none other than Vladimir Lenin is saying that.
I disagree with that interpretation.
I don't think he's saying that, but, again, he's saying it's complicated.
Yeah.
But what I found was particularly striking was his example in the UK of the Labour Party.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a critique on TikTok, it doesn't matter, where someone was saying you can't use this book as a cudgel, or whatever, because the Democratic Party is simply not comparable. To which I say, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I just think that, if anything, what we're dealing with now is a tamer version of the same thing, especially if we're comparing it to what Lenin says in the Labour Party in the UK here, which happens on exactly those pages, actually, 66, 67, and whatnot. So I guess that kind of prefaces it here. I'm here to say that Lenin says we should vote in this upcoming election, and I don't know if you are saying the same.
No, I don't think so. I think my takeaway from this text is more so that there needs to be a revolutionary party that participates in bourgeois parliamentary politics. Not necessarily that we should participate in the bourgeois parties that are already in place. I have some reasons for thinking of that as the interpretation.
I see it. Yeah. Okay. I see. We have the same interpretation, but inverted. Is what it is. Because I think that the action of not participating, the action of boycotting, is worthless without a revolutionary party.
Yes.
So, in that, to me, that says then vote, not don't vote.
Yeah, I think even though I personally am still quite conflicted about my participation in the upcoming election, which would potentially be the first election I didn't participate in the last 20 years, I am still personally conflicted. I'm not sure what I'm going to do, what I want to do.
It's totally understandable. I mean, listen, and this goes for everybody here. I am not faulting anybody for choosing not to vote in this election. I don't think that that's like, the reason that we're going to have fascism in America or whatever. Because as I've said, I think that fascism is already here.
Of course.
I just question, if we're talking about the value of an action, I don't understand the value of this inaction.
Yeah, and I do think that Lenin would agree with you that inaction, complete abstention,
isolation,
complete abstention from parliamentary politics does nothing, and so it's not a reasonable choice, is my interpretation of what he was saying here. I think he would agree with you on that. Let me just spell it out this way, because this is the way that I had the thought formulated in my brain.
Okay.
And I feel like I'm getting all mixed up trying to figure out how to put it all together. On page 47, back to page 47. To your point, Lenin says, to attempt to circumvent this difficulty by jumping over the hard task of utilizing reactionary parliaments for revolutionary purposes is absolute childishness.
Yes.
So he is saying we need to participate in parliamentary politics, at least in the interim. And a large part of his justification for that is because the masses, just because even if you are a part of the vanguard party and you have class consciousness and you recognize the need for a complete push into scientific socialism or whatever, not everybody is there. And they also don't understand all of the revolutionary action, legal and illegal revolutionary action that someone in the vanguard party might. Mm-hmm. And the way that the common person knows how to participate in politics is through parliamentarism.
Yes.
So what we need to do is still utilize that as a political tool.
Yeah, just to back you up on that, there's a lovely quote where he says, what is worn out for us is not worn out for the class, not worn out for the masses.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with that.
Yeah. However, I think the difference, though, is that he says a little further down that page, why then should a rapidly growing revolutionary mass party, under conditions of post-war disappointment and exasperation of the masses, be unable to hammer out for itself a communist faction in the worst of parliaments?
Right.
So I think his point is not so much that we are supposed to latch on to bourgeois candidates.
Yeah.
Like, we're not supposed to tie ourselves to bourgeois candidates. We're supposed to use the bourgeois framework of parliamentarism to bring forth our own candidates. And he even a little further in on page 81, I think, the communists must strain every effort to direct the movement of the working class and the development of society generally along the straightest and quickest way to the universal victory of Soviet power and the proletarian dictatorship. This truth is incontestable. And this spoke to me greatly in our particular context here, because I think what this means is that our responsibility is to push parliamentarism left,
Sure.
not to allow the candidates of bourgeois parliamentarism to pull us right.
Okay, well, so I'm glad you said that because I was thinking about that slogan earlier, and I think that it's not our duty to pull the candidate left, right? I think it's our duty to pull the workers to the left, to pull the masses to the left. And that might actually be in reaction to the party, Just to pull up that example, I was talking about
the Labor Party example.
Yeah, the Labor Party example. Because this is when he was really speaking to me here. So just to set the stage here, he's talking about in Britain. He's comparing and contrasting two groups, right? Henderson and Snowden versus Lloyd George and Churchill. And to me, that's a perfect parallel, right? It's like the Democrats versus the Republicans. We have literally a very obviously conservative faction, and then a faction that is like more well-meaning, democratic, and still bourgeois. Okay, that much is obvious. So I think there's a valid parallel there. He says here, to be more explicit, we must compel the former, the Hendersons and the Snowdens, to defeat the latter. For the former are afraid of their victory, right? People always say, do the Democrats even want to win? Okay. Secondly, we must help the majority of the working class to convince themselves through their own experience that we are right. That is, they must convince themselves of the utter worthlessness of the Hendersons and the Snowdens, of their petit bourgeois and treacherous natures, of the inevitability of their bankruptcy. That's the key there. I don't think it matters about the Hendersons and the Snowdens and the Harrises and the Walzes and all that. What I think matters more is that the working classes see that solution is not adequate. Because I think, and this is less from the text and just more from the vibe, right? That if we were to have a conservative person in power, Trump in power, right? I don't think people would say like, oh, we need revolution or whatever. They would say we need the Democrats back. Like that is the acceptable solution to the Republican problem. And I'm willing to attribute that to the masses because I think that Democrats truly have the majority. I really do. I mean, I think that if it was truly, a perfect grid of districts, one man, one vote, and every single person voted in America, the Democrats would win every single time.
100%.
Yeah, that's just a fact. Okay, I think you would be hard pressed to dispute that, even if you were the most conservative fucking think tank.
Have you seen the two maps that they show
with the population where it's because land doesn't vote.
Yeah.
Right? Because land doesn't vote. And, I start to sound like an infographic when I start talking like this. Okay? But it's because it's fucking true. So, with that being said, right, it's not that we need them to choose between Democrat and Republican, right, between Hendersons and Churchills. It's that we need them to understand that neither of those solutions are possible, right? What Lenin says is that we have to tell them the bitter truth without being preachy, of course.
Why wouldn't we throw our support behind like a Jill Stein or a Cornel West then?
Well, because I think that compromise doesn't allow us to actually, I think that undercuts our message, right? Choosing to make that compromise, I think, subverts our ultimate goal of spreading the consciousness of the class, right? Because that Jill Stein election does nothing for us, right? In fact, if you look at, 2016 as an example, right, Jill Stein was vilified. Even mentioning Jill Stein to a lot of Democrats will get you heated responses.
I mean, that's still true, but I mean, I do think that there's, to the point of educating the masses and using a bourgeois parliamentary process to help do that, to help them recognize like this process, the participation in this system isn't the solution to all of your problems, is still better done when you have a candidate that is espousing some form of like elementary class consciousness. I think we saw a lot of that with the rise of Bernie back to 2016. Talking about Bernie's campaign, I think did activate quite a lot of people that are now, 8 years later, farther left than they were at that time.
I agree. And I think that example is the perfect example of what Lenin's talking about here, right? But it's because Bernie had a chance to win that I think so many people were activated. The masses were convinced that they had an option, right? They were convinced that they had a tool they could use. And that's what activated them. I don't think that putting Jill Stein forward and saying, just vote for this perfect, I think that that's a principled response, but I don't think it's a pragmatic one. I don't think it's one that actually is the compromise that Lenin's talking about here. Because I think that what Lenin says, right, is that the purpose of the vanguard is to calculate when the potential for overtaking power exists, okay? And I think that potential is what really matters there. That potential lies in a candidate like Bernie, even if it's, I'm not saying like Bernie's a revolutionary candidate, right? But it does not exist inside the potential of Jill Stein.
Across generations!
Okay, this wasn't the original quote I was looking at, but this is a good one anyway. Towards the bottom, he says, "One must precipitate the inevitable quarrel and conflicts between the Lloyd George is really fucking me up. Hendersons, Lloyd Georges, and Churchills, Mensheviks, socialist revolutionaries, cadets, and monarchists, etc., and choose correctly the moment of the maximum disintegration between all of these buttresses of sacred private property, in order to defeat them all in one decisive offensive of the proletariat." So he's talking, well, see, I don't think that quote is adequate. I wish I could find the original one.
Well, I mean, right above that, he does say it is necessary to coordinate the strictest devotion to the idea of communism with the ability to accept all necessary practical compromises, maneuverings, temperings, zigzags.
This section I was going to come back to, because this block right above that quote you just said, I think is really, really key. Mm-hmm. And it's really reminiscent of a lot of the voices I've been hearing on the online left. Okay. The difference between the Churchills and Lloyd Georges, these political types exist in all countries, allowing for trifling national variations, and between the Hendersons and Lloyd Georges are quite unimportant and shallow from the viewpoint of the pure, i.e. extract communism. That is, of communism which has not yet ripened into practical mass political activity. Okay? From the viewpoint of the practical activity of the masses, these differences are exceedingly important. The communist who wishes not only to be a class-conscious, convinced propagandist, but a practical leader of the masses in the revolution must carefully estimate these differences and determine the moment of complete maturity of the conflicts which inevitably weaken and debilitate all of these, quote, friends. I mean, I just think that that's it. There are differences between the Democratic and Republican Party, and those differences do matter to the masses, right? And we've had this discussion many a time about the harm reduction vote, because I don't like that, and I think it's frankly bullshit. Yes, but I think that if our goal is to bring forth the consciousness of the masses, I don't know if the differences can be ignored like that.
Well, to that point about building the consciousness of the masses, I will say having two candidates that are right of Reagan has done a lot to amplify the consciousness of the masses, particularly around the issue of Israel and Gaza and what's happening in Palestine. Because if fucking genocide isn't your red line, then what the fuck is?
Okay, but I'm glad you said that, because the thing with the red line is that there's a response, and I don't think we have the tools to draw a red line.
We have candidates that are against the genocide in Palestine.
Okay, no, I do agree with you there. But the thing is, do we have candidates that are against the genocide in Palestine?
The short answer is yes, but the longer answer is their participation in the system, it's obviously rigged against them.
Yes.
And I mean, like, Ohio is one of the states, for example, that was tied up in court with if Stein was even going to be on the ballot.
Sure.
Certainly, if the conversation around your choices in a quote-unquote democratic election have already been decided on in the courts before you even have a chance to democratically vote, there's a pretty good communication of how democratic that election is.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, there are candidates, but there are mechanisms in place to stop them from being effective as candidates, largely propped up by the Democratic Party. They're the ones bringing all of these charges, these cases against Stein.
Sure.
So the answer is yes, those candidates exist, but are they viable as candidates because of the mechanisms at play? Probably no. But I do also think, like, to bring it back to the text for a second, on 68, when Lenin says, at present, it is often difficult for the, still using the example of Britain and the Labour Party, at present, it is often difficult for the British communists even to approach the masses, even to make themselves heard. But if I address the masses as a communist and invite them to vote for Henderson against Lloyd George, I most certainly will be listened to. Now, I think one interpretation of that is listen to folks on the left talk about why they are begrudgingly voting for Harris and use that as an opportunity to try to help them see how Harris is not a viable candidate for the people.
Sure.
Right? But I read that more as like, why aren't we on the left using those opportunities to actually amplify the voice of people that are actually closer in alignment with our politics and make someone like Stein or even Cornel West, Claudia de la Cruz, some people like for whatever reason.
Complex feelings.
Yeah, same. I think Jill Stein out of those is the most viable of the candidates. I think she has the most traction. And why aren't we using this as an opportunity to say, like, here is a candidate that's actually closer in alignment with all of the things that you want, and use that to more so legitimize the act of participating in it. But I guess the goal really is to delegitimize the active participation.
Sure.
So I don't know.
Well, so what I think here is that this goes back to what we were both saying originally, is that there isn't the revolutionary organization required for either of these actions to really matter. Whether we're voting for Jill Stein or not, I don't think that there's a message behind that vote either. You know, much in the same way, I don't think there's a message for the Kamala vote, right? I don't think there's actually action there. But I don't think that there's a reason not to vote is the thing. I think if you want to vote and vote for Jill Stein, that's fucking dandy. I don't think that there's as much power in a Jill Stein vote as there is for a Kamala vote, is my answer. Ultimately, just to put it completely frankly, I think that voting for president is like a blink of the eye decision. Who gives a shit, right? There's other more important things to be done.
Yes.
Right? It's not all hinging on the presidential vote. I do think, obviously, it has like, you know, a reaction down the line. But yeah, I don't know. Again, for me, it just goes back to that idea that if we have Trump, I think that people's alternative is going to be the Democrats, you know, whereas I think if you have the Democrats, I don't think Democrats are going to say, well, I guess we better have Republicans next time. You know, if we were to put Kamala in office and then be like, you know, not pushing her to the left, but pushing the base to the left, I think that that's more reasonable under a Democratic president than under a Republican.
I don't know, because I mean, I really feel like even the Democrats shifting their platform in the last couple of years, they're not against the death penalty anymore, for example. Like,
of course.
And seeing, well, especially with Harris as the candidate, and seeing the base still go along with that, not pushing back on it in any meaningful way, I think like is indication that the party leads the people, not the people leading the party. And the more that we acquiesce to that and say like, one reaction that you hear from the left online a lot, or a segment of the left online. Maybe this is really just liberals talking, but like the idea that it's easier to organize under a Democratic regime than it is under, say, a Trump presidency. I think that that's bullshit, but the more important point is like, what organization are we doing now? We're under a Democratic president right now. What organization of any meaningful significance is happening at this time? And the answer is none, really. And even people that are certainly bourgeois liberals, a part of this system, like AOC is the perfect example, that were crying crocodile tears during the Trump administration when those policies persist under a Biden administration, they're no longer speaking out against them. And so the consciousness of the people around those issues wavers as well. We don't see a stronger response to kids in cages on the border when even less is being made of it on the national stage. Sure. Which seems counterintuitive to me.
I mean, I don't want to say the answer seems obvious, but I think that it is that they're not our leaders. You know, if we're talking about the strong leadership that Lenin is describing in this book, that requires our participation in getting our people in there. AOC is not a candidate that's going to dissolve parliament from within, you know, to put it in Lenin's words, right? Bernie is not a candidate that is going to dissolve parliament from within. But the thing is that I absolutely agree with you that it is stark and pretty harrowing to see the base go along with the rightward shift of the Democrats. I mean, but they've been doing that since Clinton. You know, I do agree with you in that sense. But I do think that, I don't know, I mean, who's more likely to do the Red Scare again, right? If we're just talking about our ability to legally, just the legal side of things, participate in democracy, I think that we have much more of an option under Democrats than under Republicans.
I don't know that that's true. I mean, maybe I'm just being hyperbolic or whatever, but
maybe.
I mean, who are the ones sending in goose steppers to shut down encampments on college campuses? That's not happening under a Trump presidency.
Well, sure, but I don't necessarily think that they're not federal troops, right?
Didn't the National Guard go in at times?
I don't remember.
Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it probably wasn't a Biden call. But anyway, the point is like, what was the national response to that?
Sure.
It wasn't freedom of speech is an important part of every American's right to protest. It's like Operation Garden Pot all over again, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, it's wild to see the Overton window shift. You know, how are we going to pull it back, though? I don't think it starts with the candidates. I think it starts with the base.
Well, that kind of takes me back to something you said earlier that struck me. You said with Bernie, part of what was useful or powerful about Bernie as a candidate in 2016 is that people that were being activated by him politically thought that they had an opportunity to win.
Yeah.
And the situation with Bernie, I think, is a great encapsulation of exactly how the mechanisms of bourgeois parliamentary politics will shut down anything that looks like it might push on its edges in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people that maybe were activated by that saw what happened to Bernie at the DNC in 2016 and got immediately disillusioned by it. And now here we are 8 years later. But we saw the same thing happen again in 2020. There was definitely collusion happening around him as a candidate yet again on the Democratic side. And then here we are 4 years later. I think it's probably fair to say that most people that participate in the election don't think that their vote matters. So what if everyone or a majority of people that participate don't feel like they can win? Like neither of these candidates is a win.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's not about the election for me. It's about what comes after. The better question is, why do you think that it's bullshit that it's easier to organize under Democrats? Just because we haven't done it?
Yeah, I just historically, what is the foundation for that? If I was going to say zoom out and like speak speculatively, I think people feel safer under a Democratic regime.
Sure.
And so they feel less onus to organize. I think when Trump was president, you saw a lot more liberals, I wouldn't say being politically active, but certainly like were more outspoken in their disagreement with things that were happening, like the quote Muslim ban and stuff like that. Things that were happening under Trump administration were getting people talking about important issues that could have led to more organization or could have been, you know, exploited by actual organizers on the left to bring more people into like a revolutionary party. I think under a Democratic regime, I keep saying regime.
Yes. Under the cabal, the Clinton cabal.
Under Democrats, I think people feel generally safer, and so they're less outraged by things. And so whether it's easier or not, it's certainly not happening anymore.
Again, though, and this is what I was saying earlier, right? We did see some organization happen under Trump, but it was organization for like resist libs. It was organization for like pussy hat people, you know?
Yeah.
And like those marches in the streets, what did they ultimately accomplish? You know, there was organization that happened, but it wasn't for our cause. It was for the Democrats again. You know, it was for back to brunch. Brunch was the goal, not communism. Sorry, you know, I hate to put it so flagrantly, but like that's it, you know?
Yeah.
It is tricky. I ultimately, I don't think either of us have the community organizing chops to really speak on what it is here.
My participation in those things was generally more anarchic.
Yeah. I mean, I've spoken a little bit on my time with an organization, and it was short and not fun and pretty weak. Also, I felt like shit. And so I didn't do it. And also I felt shitty not being able to commit myself to it as much as I would have liked. But ultimately I decided that even if I could do that, it wouldn't provide me with any satisfaction.
I have been thinking a lot about organizations and organizing a lot more lately.
Yeah. I just thinking back to when we read What Is to Be Done, and I just kept going, it can't be another party, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to start the New Workers' People's Party Liberation Committee action of wherever, you know, volume 16. Like, what am I going to do that does it better than these people? I'm sure that the people in PSL and CPUSA and FRSO are all highly committed communists that are well-read, you know, have done the thinking, have done the self-criticism. I'm positive. I don't think that they're necessarily opportunist CIA wreckers, whatever. You know, I don't believe that, right? What can I do differently that they have not already done? Okay? What am I doing differently that won't lead me down the same road that these organizations have? You know, what does it truly mean to have a revolutionary party in America? Are any of these parties that we have revolutionary? It doesn't feel like it, but I don't fucking know.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think about that often. I knew that you were going to say, like, the answer can't be another party, because I remember you saying that in that episode.
Because there's so many, and they're still trying it. They're still doing it.
Well, and I agree with that, but I'm speaking from the outside as a person that is 100% not as well read as the majority of people in those parties, not as historied in my participation as a lot of those people in those parties, you know what I mean? So like, I don't really have room to say what I think is the right thing or not, because who the fuck am I? But I mean, like, it just has to be, it's a lack of leadership and a lack of organization that is, why are there so many fucking parties is a good example of like one of the core problems. Is that these schisms that get built that stop people from unifying in coalition against the biggest enemy and then sorting out their issues.
It reminds me of something that Lenin says here, where he's like, our goal is to break down the barriers between us and the people, not to put them up. These parties should be able to compromise with each other. That's like adequate political compromise, because for one, their principles are the same, right? They are for the dictatorship of the proletariat. They are for the transition to socialism, whatever. So why can't there be compromises made here? Is it that serious? I haven't engaged in any program debates on Twitter or whatever. Whenever I see them, they seem ridiculous. Because, okay, yeah, this is a whole nother discussion, because it's is what is in your public facing program, does it have to be the absolute truth? If CPUSA doesn't advocate for revolution in their program, does that really mean they're not a revolutionary party?
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that I think is very silly, and I understand that there's it's tough, because Lenin also talks about unqualified centralization, utmost discipline. How do you toe the line between an extreme disciplinary structure and then also being able to make these compromises? That's a crazy contradiction, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And he even talks about on 53, he says in 1907, the Bolsheviks for a short time formed a formal political bloc in the Duma elections with the socialist revolutionaries.
Yeah.
And he goes on to talk about unity of coalition and how there is a need to unify in coalition with other groups while still trying to maintain that, quote, iron discipline that he talks about quite a lot.
Yeah. Did you have a quote? There's a great one on 54. Is that where you are?
I was about to get to it. Let's jump right to it.
I'm certain it's the one you're talking about. We effected an undeniable compromise in order to prove to the peasants that we do not want to dominate them.
Yep.
Right? But to come to an understanding with them. There's a lot of rehabilitation that needs to be done about the perception of communism in the world, and I'm not so crazy to be maybe we need a paradigm shift. Maybe we need to just fucking change up the whole dictionary.
Well, that would be an argument for why CPUSA would have in their platform as a part of their program the idea of a proletarian revolution, because you want to. I mean, there's questions of the legality of that and all of the how that's going to change the way you can actually operate in the United States, for example. But being plain spoken with the language and using the terms and using that as a means of educating the masses against the very clear anti-communist sentiment that we've been indoctrinated in, specifically anti-Stalinist, but anti-communist in general. That could maybe go a long way, and that would maybe be an important part of what organizations can or should be doing as a part of this, what is the goal of an organization? Re-education of the masses.
Right. Re-education is so funny every time. Yeah. Education of the masses.
Yeah.
Because they're not educated right now. That's right. Yeah. Anti-indoctrination. Yeah. We're not the ones. You're already indoctrinated. Yeah. It's the deprogram, dude.
Exactly.
There you go. Y'all did it, boys. No. Word.
But he does continue to talk about that coalition on 55, where he says, it is incumbent upon communists to seek and to find an appropriate form of compromise with them.
The Social
Democrats, yeah. Such a compromise as, on the one hand, would facilitate and accelerate the necessary complete fusion with this wing, and on the other, would in no way tie the hands of the communists in their ideo-political struggle against the opportunist right wing and the independents. I would argue that that's yet another recommendation for looking at places like the Green Party and stuff like that as viable alternatives in these bourgeois elections that we either participate in a non-revolutionary way or choose not to participate at all, which is also non-revolutionary. If we can at least build compromise and get behind candidates that are closer to our platform.
I think it goes back to viability, though, because I think that that kind of coalition that you're talking about is a way down the line thing, where you have 40% and the Greens have 6%. And it's hey, we'll settle our differences on nuclear energy or whatever. So you can get in here and we can hold power. From our position right now, I don't think that that's a compromise that needs to be taken. I don't think there's any actual viability in there. Again, I mean, we keep talking about the choice to cast the vote, we're all making the decision and that big block vote is going to swing the election, but I don't think it matters,
Well, the other thing, I mean, this is a completely separate point, I guess, but the Democrats have made it quite clear that they don't give a shit about anybody on the left, and so they're not trying to win the votes of anyone on the left. So if everyone on the left chose to vote elsewhere, that's not on them. That's not on us for voting non-democratically. That's on the Democrats.
In our minds, yes, but would it end up that way in the public perception, right? Because Again,
I mean, media would certainly skew
think
it a
about
certain way.
2016, right? Why did Hillary lose? It was because of that bitch Jill Stein taking all the fucking votes.
They even call it the Nader effect. I was a participant in the 2000 election.
There you go.
He got 9% of the national vote, I believe, and they said that 9%, that's what stole the election from Gore.
It's the left's fault. It's the left's fault, you know?
You can't say that we're non-consequential enough to not worry about our vote and then blame us when you don't get it.
Huh.
How can it be both?
So interesting. Putting your enemy as the ultimate power and also completely powerless. There's a group of people that do that, right? That's one of the core tenets of a specific ideology, believe it or not. Interesting.
Well, another thing that comes up a lot in discourse online is your vote will effectively continue to be meaningless until you support candidates that support ranked choice voting when your vote can eventually actually have some power. Where is there a candidate that supports ranked choice vote?
It's the bourgeois permanent revolution. It's first we must complete the ranked choice stage of development, and then we can finally... No, I agree. Now I just feel crazy. I came in here like, yeah, let's go Kamala. Now I'm like...
You didn't fall far from the coconut tree.
God is dead. No.
Something that blew my mind, and really, I have a tendency toward fatalism that's well established on this show so far. This really, I felt that revolutionary optimism that everyone tells me that I should be feeling and I shouldn't let be stolen away from me by the ruling class. I felt it while reading this because Lenin spells it out. He says the Bolsheviks took Russia with 611,000 members. 500,000 people, essentially, took Russia.
Yeah.
There are 500,000 communists in the United States.
Sure.
Do you not feel like amazed by that? Like if we could build some sort of coalition amongst not even saying bring in the anarchists. I wouldn't do that to my comrades. There are 500,000 communists in the United States. Many of us are well armed and have
CIA, turn it off,
have principled intent. They fucking took Russia, man. Why can't we?
Why can't we?
Is that not, I just felt so empowered when I read that.
Yeah. It's doable, I think, is the ultimate thing. You know, it feels impossible, but I know it's not.
Yeah.
You know, I know it's not. It's clearly doable. Mostly because most people are good. I mean, that's got to be the core of your belief, is that most people will do good things if they can, you know? I don't know if that's probably poorly worded, but, you know, the sentiment remains.
I think that's even at the center of a lot of liberal ideology, that generally speaking, everyone wants what's best for them and those around them. And if you believe that to be true,
then maybe we should provide what's best for everyone around them, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Crazy.
And with 611,000, they did it in Russia in 1917.
Yeah. I mean, likewise, I'm reading Red Star Over China right now, which is about Mao. Yeah, the communists were a large party in China, but after the Long March, you know, like 8,000 of them remained.
Yeah.
They were able to build it back up. I mean, they did the damn thing. There's something optimistic there, too. I mean, just like reading about the heroics of these troops on the march was really inspiring to me. And it goes back to what Lenin's saying about discipline here, you know? I don't have the fucking discipline to do that. Like,
yeah,
this second, I mean, you know,
yeah.
Could that change? Yes. I mean, I don't think that it's impossible.
That's the real work of an organization. Not to circle back immediately to
whatever
something else, but I mean, like, we want to participate in a way to see everyone have what everyone deserves. Everyone have a higher quality of life. We want that. We don't know how to enact it. We don't know exactly what to do. We don't have the iron discipline necessary to do it.
Yeah.
But an organization should help us build that.
I don't know enough about the other organizations. I really only have my one tainted perspective.
Yeah.
You know, that's the main thing there. Like, there's a lot of FRSO people on Twitter that are absolute freaks in a good way. Like, they're like, you know, I don't have any allegory that doesn't make them sound fascist, but they're really cool, I promise. No, they're well-disciplined, they're well-read, they're not afraid to argue their points from a theoretical standpoint, and they back it up with the actions of their own party. I'm not shilling for FRSO here because I really don't know anything else about them. But, you know, it's been my experience that there are parties that do that. Now, bringing it back to the original thing, though, do I necessarily think that that's like the kind of revolutionary party that we require? I don't know. You know, maybe I should find out is actually now what I'm thinking.
Something else that I thought was interesting on page 13, and then it comes up again on 21. I mean, he does mention it a couple of times, but he's talking about the progression of revolution.
Yeah.
Where he says it needs to start with an economic strike. That economic strike will turn into or give way to a political strike, and then that is what grows into a rising of the masses and ultimately feeds a revolution. And then again on 21, he says at that time, he's talking about the October Revolution in Russia in 1905.
Yeah.
At that time, the boycott proved right, not because non-participation in reactionary parliaments is right, but because when we studied the objective situation, we saw that it led to the rapid transformation of mass strikes into political, then into revolutionary strikes, and after that into a rising. And I think that that's interesting. I think like it would be really great to see a general strike like actually get organized in the West. I got very excited about the
longshoreman strike. I knew you were going to say it because I was like, I just saw this morning that they were like, we settled it.
They settled in days.
Well, they allowed an extension of time for negotiation at least. And they also got like a 60% raise.
Yeah.
Is what
I saw it was like a 65% raise in the rates or something like that.
So ostensibly a dub, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that it's
cause,
not a win for the longshoremen because, of course, like they're getting better wages. I'm sure they negotiated other things as well. But like there was an opportunity with this strike because like that would have shut down a significant portion of the economy. Now, they were still letting in all the military stuff, which I guess...
Their age-honored tradition.
Yeah.
Carry another 20 trillion to Israel.
But I was really excited. I was like, this is an October surprise. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To contextualize it in the election, like, we know what happened with the rail strike and what Biden's administration did with that. And so, like, are they going to do something like that again this close to the election? Probably not. So I felt like there was great potential with this strike, and it just ended so quickly.
Yeah, but a part of me is just saying, like, potential for what?
I think the potential would be, so the difficulty with a strike like, well, any strike, I guess, but with a strike like this in particular, maybe, is that the narrative around it, the rhetoric around it is going to be like, this is why you can't buy your groceries. Selfish longshoremen are shutting down, and now you can't get...
Yeah, the gas is $16 a gallon or whatever.
Yeah, that's certainly the rhetoric that's going to get pushed by the ruling class. But I would hope the potential that actually exists there is for that educational potential that we're talking about, something that can actually activate the masses and help them recognize, develop some consciousness around, like, you actually do have the power to do whatever. Like, I know I'm all over the place, but back to the point about, like, do we even have a candidate that will do anything for us? Our votes don't matter. It's all decided before we ever step in the box. Anyway, that kind of helplessness to the system is combated very quickly in a situation like this, where you see, like, oh, we actually do have the power to affect meaningful change if we choose to wield it.
Yeah.
And then it was gone.
I just don't see the connect, you know what it makes me think of actually is in the book. It's a nice segue actually into when he talks about participation in bourgeois trade unions. Here it is on page 33. Without the closest connection with the trade unions, without their hearty support and self-sacrificing work, not only in economic but also in military organization, it would have been, of course, impossible to govern the country and maintain the dictatorship for 2.5 years, even for 2.5 months. Right? So, first off, the trade unions are critical. They're at least a primitive form of organization of the masses that is necessary. However, a little further down he says, the connection with the masses through trade unions we admit to be insufficient. Practice in the course of the revolution has given rise to non-party workers and peasant conferences. We endeavor by every means to support, develop, and extend such institutions. So what spoke to me there was the connection to the masses. Like, yes, the trade unions are a primitive form of organization of the masses and are valuable in that sense, right? That organization, even that discipline, I would say, is useful to the cause, but it's not as direct a connection as we need in order to elevate their consciousness. I don't think necessarily that just showing people that a strike would stop the economy is necessarily going to convey to them that they have the power to utilize that tool in such a way to then make gains, you know, outside of maybe like a pay raise, right? Outside of like a purely economic struggle, right?
It never transforms into the political struggle.
That's exactly it. I threw myself off there because I said Stalin by accident. I almost said Stalin. But that's exactly what Lenin means when he's saying it's at first an economic struggle, but then transforms into a political struggle, right? I don't see that transformation into the political struggle happening with any kind of strike in our current day and age, simply because, again, we don't have the organization, right? We don't have the organization backing it. We don't have a way to signal to the masses and to say this strike is a tool of our use. Because, people are aware of strikes, I think that people are well aware of what a strike can accomplish. I don't think that that's the issue, right? I don't think they're unaware of strikes as an option. I just don't think that they have the connection between a massive economic crisis like a general strike would cause and the political transformation of power.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right about that.
I'm really feeling black-pilled on the party right now. Not on the concept of the party, but on like having a party right now in America. There's no structure that's going to lead the masses, at least one that if it ain't speaking to me right now, it means it's probably not speaking to anybody right now, because you and I are primed to...
Yeah, we're already chomping at the bit.
We're primed to receive, if like the party, capital T, capital P, all rights reserved, TM, appeared in Dayton, we would probably be like, okay, great, that doesn't happen. Does that mean that we need to go out and fucking start one? I really hope not. I can think of a million cool acronyms, though. The idea of a grand scale revolution in a place as grand as the U.S. is, I think, absurd. One, because there's not a central body like the Tsar that we just overthrow and seize power, right? If, say, like D.C. were to fall, I think that the likely thing that would happen would be regional coalitions. There might be some states that secede in support of whatever regime were to take power in DC, but like that's such a far off pipe dream idea anyway that I don't think it would ever happen. I think what's much more likely is like socialism in one state, where it's like this is
building a Soviet.
Yeah, I hesitate to say Soviet, but yeah, that strikes me as like the most reasonable thing, like literally the Everglades commune or something, mm-hmm. It would have to be in somewhere natural like that where the terrain would give it advantage to guerrillas.
We're right at the base of the Appalachian Mountains, my man.
Listen.
And every Appalachian I've ever met is pretty radical.
Yeah. But that's the thing. That's what I'm talking about, though. It's much more likely, if we were going to talk about revolution in the U.S., which I'm already like rolling my eyes at, it's much more likely for that kind of thing to happen, right? Like the Maoist model, right? Liberated red zones under guerrilla control, and then they would spread out and achieve mass support. That massive support would, by definition, spread their base of operations. I think that's much more likely. Less and less likely as the technological apparatus of the state ever increases. Yeah. But nonetheless, that's what we're really talking about. It just made me think of local action more than anything. Like, why are we even fucking talking about Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? Because fuck all that. Who cares?
Yeah, they're both fascists.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I agree. I do think that there's differences between the parties, right? I'm not those people that are like, they're the exact same. But I do, it's like the left, it's two sides of the same coin, right? They are, what's that fucking quote? America is also a one-party state, but in typical American extravagance, it has two of them. Yeah, that's a fucking banger.
That's dope. Yeah. The only other thing that I had from the text, this came from the trade union talk, but the other thing was that my ignorance was answered about how Soviets actually work.
Yes.
And I thought it was very timely.
100% the same, because I was like, organizational notes here. That's so nice.
Exactly. On 34, I guess, when he's talking about the Soviets there. Then, of course, all the work of the party is done through the Soviets, which unite the laboring masses irrespective of the difference of their trade or profession. Through these congresses, the city fulfills its function of leading the peasantry. So I had questions after reading the transitional program about how that would work and how they wouldn't just fall into infighting across one another. Reading this section helped me understand how that could actually be a viable system.
Yeah, well, the reason I am like hesitating is because I've been reading a book from the Cambridge University Soviet series, which debatable its usefulness, but it's called Soviet State and Society Between Revolutions. And the second revolution is the Stalinist revolution, where the guy argues that the system of bureaucracy stays in place, but rather than being bottom up, it then becomes top down, where each layer is simply passing down the orders from above. And so it just gave me a little bit of pause here. It's like, even if we have this like democratically set up structure, it doesn't mean that necessarily everything is going to be hunky-dory. I don't know. It just kind of hit me in the heart a little bit, because I was just thinking about fucking Stalin again, that piece of shit. That son of a bitch.
You're sounding like an anarchist here.
I'm just like, I mean, I can agree with the absolute power corrupts, I can get down with that.
Yeah, anytime I agree with anarchists, and I am an anarchist at heart.
There you go.
And I agree with the anarchists in the idea that any form of hierarchy creates opportunity for exploitation.
Yeah.
And so a hierarchical system like that, where you have a top-down pushing orders, is inherently anti-democratic. I don't like that.
Yeah, right. Okay. But it just made me think of it there. But I am grateful to see some more structural notes.
Lenin did actually kind of address that, even though it came to bear after his death. But he did say, still on 34, "It is hoped that the reader will understand why, to a Russian Bolshevik well acquainted with this mechanism," talking about the Soviets, "and having watched its growth out of small underground circles during 25 years, all talk of from above or from below, the dictatorship of leaders or the dictatorship of the masses cannot but appear as childish nonsense."
Yeah, it's something like discussing whether the left leg or right arm is more useful.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever. Thanks. But what happened next, Lenin?
Yeah. Lenin says, "For the communists in Germany, parliamentarism is, of course, politically outworn, but, and this is the whole point, we must not deem that which is outworn for us is necessarily outworn for the class, the masses," that quote that you called before. But he says farther down in that paragraph, "It is our duty to call their bourgeois democratic and parliamentary prejudices by their right name, but at the same time, it is our duty to watch soberly the actual state of consciousness and preparedness of the whole class, and not the communist vanguard alone, of the whole laboring mass, and not merely its foremost men." And my thought to that is like, I don't know though, isn't it the job of the vanguard to lead the people in a case like this, to see, not necessarily to watch soberly as some sort of like passive observer, but instead to take that as an opportunity as a member of the vanguard to lead the people toward the consciousness required to overturn these outworn systems like parliamentarism? It just seems kind of like he wants to have it both ways in there, and I didn't understand.
I mean, I think it's that contradiction we were mentioning earlier, where it's like you have to stay disciplined to the fundamental principles, but you still have to be able to make the compromise, And just like you were saying, it's like, how do you know what compromise is admissible? It's the same problem. I don't want to say it just comes from historical context, but like, I don't know what else.
Yeah.
There's a lot to it. Like, how do you measure where the vanguard is in relation to the masses? Saying like, are we ahead of the masses? Are we behind the masses? Because there's examples where Lenin talks about like the party was behind the masses, right? Like the Spartacist uprising is one. The masses were ready to go. The Spartacists were not necessarily thinking this was a revolutionary moment. I don't know. That is tough. I don't know how much reading is going to help that either, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Just besides the history. Because I don't know. There haven't been enough revolutions.
Well, so many of the texts that we've read so far have talked about, from the perspective of the writers, Lenin and Trotsky are the two that come foremost to my mind, where they talk about how they could, and it's clear in their writing that the conditions are ripe for revolution. Yeah. They know that it's coming, and they recognize that, and they've been organizing around it. How, though? I mean, like, I see things that I think have revolutionary potential and then they dwindle away, like the Occupy movement we've talked about it previously, or even the anti-war sentiment in the turn of the century around the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then those things get stifled or they just kind of fizzle away. The uprising around George Floyd's murder in 2020. These things have revolutionary potential in my mind, but I think that's because I'm coming at them with the revolutionary intent. And so, like, how do you know to recognize the conditions are the conditions, you know? So how do you know if you're leading the people or being led by the people? I don't know.
Fuck. I also, you know, just as in it's like a unique conditional thing, like, I don't know what it's going to take in the U.S. I don't know what it's going to make. You know, I've heard so many people say that conditions are overripe at this point. You know, they've been ripe forever. And it's like, I can't help but agree with you, but we don't have the structure to fucking pick the fruit. Like, I don't, you know.
That's a good way to put it. I was actually thinking about this, like, and this maybe will bring us back to talking about the longshoreman strike, because Hurricane Helene has devastated much of the South and the East Coast.
Yeah.
And we were clearly not prepared for that.
Of course.
Where also FEMA is, quote, out of money, according to Joe Biden. So no help is being given to the people whose lives have been upturned by this completely preventable situation. At the same time, we're funding genocide in Gaza, continue to send money that we don't have to give to the citizens of the United States to kill brown children in Palestine. So that's happening. And there is an uprising around the genocide that's happening in Palestine where people are becoming more conscious of the kind of colonial imperialist attitudes of the West. These things are all kind of stewing together to create some condition that could be really powerful. I agree with you that we don't have the organization to capitalize on that.
I honestly don't even know three things, because I'm about to lose all three of them. One, I think that's a fucking fantastic point about Helene, because my uncle, my Trump voting uncle, posted a meme on LinkedIn about, you know,
I forgot he memes on LinkedIn
always. 66 million to Israel, 35 million to Ukraine, you know, billion, whatever, but only $750 for our American citizen, like that kind of shit. And I'm like, oh my, like, whoa, you know, like, based. I mean, but like my very Republican friend was like, he sent me a meme of like it was two rockets, like one set of rockets and then Iron Dome rockets coming up. And it was like my taxpayers' money, also my taxpayers' money. So like, that's the thing, is like that kind of situation has a much broader appeal than you might expect. And the second thing is that Chris is adamant that we're going to get into a boots on the ground war in Iran. I think that would be the dissolution of the Union. If we try to forcibly send troops back to the Middle East, it'll be the end of days. Okay, thank you. I mean, can you imagine the popular reaction about another Middle Eastern war? Even if it's under the umbrella of Israel, I think that is losing its credence, you know? So it's just very interesting to me, because I'm thinking about like a colonial conflict that might have the potential for revolution. It's the first time ever. For a show first, I've remembered all three of my points. I don't know if we know what that kind of organization looks like. Right now, I mean, we're picturing like traditional Leninist organizations. Is that structure adequate to what we need for seizing the popular moment in America, right? I'm not against like a Leninist organization, a democratically centralist organization. I think that the party structure required to seize the moment, like the longshoreman strike or the Middle Eastern conflicts, I think is grander than what we're envisioning even, you know? I think that we don't even know what that structure really is going to look like.
I would agree. I sit completely and knowingly in ignorance of what that organization would be.
Because I was just thinking, you know, it's like, what do we really want when we're talking about like an organization there? Are we talking about like a third party on the ticket? You know, like, I don't think it's voting for PSL on the ballot. I don't think that's the organization we're looking for that's going to, you know, be able to seize this moment. Again, I don't think any of the parties we have are adequate. But I also don't think that, I don't know what an adequate party looks like.
I think if you would have asked me years ago, I would have suggested that it's a lack of charismatic leadership. And I think that is certainly a part of the equation. But, you know, a charismatic leader wouldn't do enough. But like, we don't have a Malcolm X. We don't have a Fred Hampton. We've lost Angela Davis.
We also need the ideology outside of the charisma. I think that, honest to God, like, I don't think that the charisma needs to be the defining factor.
Well, sure, but I mean, I said that thinking specifically of someone like Fred Hampton, who was well-read and principled, and education was an important part of the party platform for at least the Chicago chapters of the Black Panther Party. They went through a 6-week training to even join the party, where they had to read, specifically Mao, in order to recognize how the organization of the party would be structured and the things that they intended to do. But he was also charismatic enough to bring new people into the party all of the time. And so, like, there's a difference. I mean...
No, I agree with you. I mean, absolutely. Like, a lot of leftists are losers, okay?
Yeah, that's...
Sorry. I've seen many very cool sounding clips on YouTube, and then I'll click them, and it's like... Today we will be discussing the left communist opposition of Germany in 1916. And I'm like, oh, fuck.
Don't get me started on communist YouTube, man. The videos are so fucking boring.
Yeah.
If you are trying to win people over, you are losing. This is terrible.
Doing a terrible job. But the problem is that I don't want it to be snappy. That's not I need it to be disciplined. I need it to be principled. We're back to that question again. It's like, how do you make the compromise without compromising the principles?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what compromises are adequate? Fuck.
Let's move on to the cavalcade of quotes.
What else spoke to you in this text?
Well, in the very first chapter, in what sense can we speak of the international significance of the Russian Revolution?
Yes.
It becomes clear where Lenin turns on Kautsky. He says the anonymous pamphlet, The World Revolution, which appeared in 1919 in Vienna, shows plainly their whole process of thought, or what is more correct, all their appalling imbecility, pedantry, dastardliness, and the betrayal of working class interests under the guise of defending the idea of world revolution. And I love that he closes the first section by saying, how well did Kautsky write 18 years ago?
18 years ago.
So funny.
The Renegade. The Renegade Karl Kautsky is like such a badass title. Sorry. You know, it sucks that he's lame. I'm
just going to go in order with a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And he mentions the 3 conditions for a strong proletarian dictatorship on page 11. First, by the class consciousness of the proletarian vanguard. Secondly, by its ability to mix with the toiling masses. And thirdly, by the soundness of the political leadership. Without all these conditions, discipline in a revolutionary party, really capable of being a party of the foremost class whose object is to overthrow the bourgeoisie and transform society, is impossible of realization. I like very plainly spoken, clear instructions. It has to be this, this, and this. Bing, bang, boom, then you've got it.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
You know, I like on page 15, something interesting he says is that, you know, this was a factor in the Second International's failure, was that they were too used to working in a legal environment, right? Sorry. So he says the Second International were unable, when the war deprived them of their blessed legality in all advanced countries, to organize anything even approximating such free, illegal interchange of views and such free, illegal hammering out of the right views as did the Russian revolutionists. So, like, there's even something to be said about working in just the legal structure that you lose the ability to work illegally, so to speak. One interesting thing, though, that I was thinking about, what does illegal work even look like in the U.S.? Mm-hmm. You know, like, I don't know what that means outside of like getting ticketed for foods, not bombs, you know?
I mean, groups like the Earth Liberation Front and the Animal Liberation Front are good examples of what illegal revolutionary work might look like. It's not specifically communist.
Yeah.
But
well,
I mean,
sure. But
the liberation of enslaved animals is something that ALF does.
Sure.
Not as much in the United States as they do in, say, the UK, but that's an example of illegal work that is revolutionary.
Yeah, I was just thinking in a communist framework, right? Because I think that like the traditional consciousness building activities that communists typically do that might have been considered illegal, especially like in Russia, like
pamphlet writing and shit.
Illegal newspapers, that kind of shit. But we don't have to worry about that, right? So
not currently.
Yeah, hopefully never. So like I'm just curious what what hypothetically, obviously, that illegal work looks like.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't necessarily know if it's something like monkey wrenching, you know?
Yeah, that's a good example with the Earth Liberation Front.
Like, I think that there is like aspects of sabotage that can be considered revolutionary aspects or revolutionary actions, but I don't know how necessarily. I mean, I'm trying to think of like an activity that is revolutionary, builds consciousness, and would also be illegal.
Yeah.
It's not a critical thing, obviously. I'm just curious because the illegal actions that they're talking about here are like meeting illegally because you can't have
secret
more than
underground organizations. Yeah.
Shit like that. Like we can have all sorts of secret underground organizations, but what are they fucking doing besides the regular shit? Like, I guess they could be like appropriating weapons or something. I don't know, just something there.
That is where my mind was going, was toward the development of militias.
I guess training maybe.
Yeah, but
not illegal.
That's not inherently illegal.
They already do it. The fascists do it all the fucking time.
Yeah,
man.
you'll certainly be on a list, and you'll be the ATF and the FBI will be on your ass. But like, there's nothing inherently illegal about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I can credit Lenin with this, but it's a great line on page 14. He says, "Friends are better known in misfortune." I don't know if that's like a common axiom or something like that, but that's a fucking banger line.
Yeah.
So good for him.
Good for him. Way to go, Lenin. You got 1 point to Lenin. On page 18, one thing I enjoyed was when he said that the small owner moves easily when faced with ruin to extreme revolutionism, but is incapable of displaying consistency, organization, discipline, and firmness. The petty bourgeois, gone mad from the horrors of capitalism, is a social phenomenon which, like anarchism, is a characteristic of all capitalist countries. So there's that thing again, right? Is anarchism just an expression of our bourgeois liberal ideology? Maybe.
He does call out the uselessness of anarchism a little bit in that section, though, a couple of times.
We didn't really talk about the labor aristocracy. We kind of name dropped it. But maybe for our broad base audience, it might be useful to mention it. All he's saying really is that there's a layer of the proletariat that's elevated above in order to suppress the other layer, right?
Yeah, that was my take. I was just characterizing it as like a petty bourgeois quite a lot.
Yeah, the middle class are truly the overseers of the,
Yeah, they enforce the ruling class as much, if not more, than the powers of the ruling class themselves.
Here's something that I enjoyed. Just a little progress update on Russia, right?
Okay.
This is on page 29. He says, "We in Russia, in the third year after the overthrow of the bourgeoisie, are going through the first steps in the transition from capitalism to socialism. That is to say, the lowest stage of communism. Classes remain and will remain for years everywhere after the proletarian conquest of power. Perhaps in England, where there's no peasantry, the period will be shorter. But even there, small owners, holders of property, exist. To abolish classes means not to get rid of landlords and capitalists. That we have accomplished with comparative ease. It means also to get rid of the small commodity producers, and they cannot be eliminated or suppressed." But at the bottom, really, this spoke to me. To defeat the great centralized bourgeoisie is 1,000 times easier than to defeat, quote-unquote, millions and millions of small owners in their daily, imperceptible, inconspicuous, but demoralizing activities, achieve the very results desired by the bourgeoisie. So, kill the cop in your head is really the thing there.
It's so funny. My favorite part of that was the line right before what you had read, where he says, "Without an iron party hardened in fight, without a party possessing the confidence of all that is honest in the given class, without a party capable of observing the disposition of the masses and of influencing it successfully to conduct such a struggle, is impossible."
It's so funny because I highlighted everything but that. Yeah.
I'm becoming much more an advocate for a centralized party. I'm becoming much more comfortable with it as we do this reading. And that really spoke to me. The need for, quote, the party.
Yeah.
Capital P.
The dictatorship of the proletariat is a resolute, persistent struggle, sanguinary and bloodless, violent and peaceful, military and economic, educational and administrative, against the forces and traditions of old society. So it's, every tool in the arsenal.
Yeah. On 35, I liked this quote against utopianism, where he says, "We can and must begin to build up socialism, not with the fantastic human material created by our imagination, but out of the material left to us by capitalism."
No doubt very difficult, in quotes. Yeah.
Word.
I mean, we're working on what we got.
That's right.
That's it.
I have another one kind of out of context, but on 45, the surest way of discrediting a new political, and not only political, idea and to cause it harm is, under pretext of defending it, to reduce it to an absurdity. I really think that speaks volumes about the way communism has been framed in the United States and the hurdles that we face in getting people to recognize what it actually is versus the absurd version of it that has been what it's been reduced to in the minds of the kind of indoctrinated masses.
I was just thinking about my bumper sticker, man. Try reading Marx. Just try. Yeah. Just try. I guarantee that if you just read what Marx is writing on the page, I don't think you'll come away with any of those, like, they're bloodthirsty manipulator, they're fucking, I don't see that happening. In fact, I think to get that picture, that's like a pretty, in order to read and get that picture, that's a pretty advanced analysis, I would say, so it's very funny for them to just be like, because if you actually read what they're saying on a base level, I think you would not say that.
Yeah. That's like a common meme where it's like, how do you get people to agree with you without ever using the word or whatever? It's like, talk about communism. Yeah.
Every proletarian who goes through strikes experiences compromise. That was nice, Oh, actually, that is an interesting question. It's in line with what we're just now talking about on page 79, where he's saying the bourgeoisie, too, has changed. The bourgeoisie is scared and enraged by Bolshevism and has been driven almost to the point of madness. So just a little parallel there. Then millions of copies of the bourgeois papers, which were raising all sorts of howls against Bolsheviks, helped draw the masses in to study Bolshevism. And then further down again, they work for us. They help us get the masses interested in the question of nature and significance of Bolshevism, and they cannot act otherwise. For to pass over Bolshevism in silence, to stifle it, in this they've already failed. This was interesting to me, I just think, because it is a distinction between then and now. You know, I don't necessarily believe the Streisand effect is going to help us out here, where people are like, oh, let me go look up what communism is all about. I don't necessarily think that happens. I think under the crushing influence of the media apparatus, I think that communism is shown in a bad light whenever it gets pressed, and I think that that's very effective.
Yeah, I agree. I wrote in the margin right next to that, I'm not sure that this is true in the U.S. We first have to deprogram that propaganda.
Yeah, so this was like my one place of pushback kind of against Lenin here is because I was just like, there is indeed bad press, like 100%.
Yeah, but I think we should maybe works better as a transition into talking about questions.
Yeah.
Then.
What questions did you have, Aaron?
I had two that I made note of, one of which requires me to go to page 73. To contextualize a little bit, Lenin is talking about the problems of the day for a class-conscious vanguard in the international labor movement. He tells us that the first task is education. Bring the general mass, still in the majority of cases slumbering, apathetic, hidebound, and ignorant, to their new position. So we need to educate the masses.
Right.
And then further down, he says, here one must ask oneself not only whether the vanguard of the revolutionary class has been convinced, but also whether the historically active forces of all classes of a given society have been properly distributed so that the final battle may not be premature. Kind of comes back to that question of how do you know that you're on the precipice of revolution? Yep. That is my question. How is one to know? I don't understand how to take the pulse of the masses in such a way to recognize that they're ready. They have enough class consciousness to be ready for the revolution. Perhaps this is the nature of the technocracy that we live in now, where we kind of exist in these echo chambers, where to me, in the world that I live in, everyone is a communist or an anarchist.
Yeah.
So it's like, man, we're ready. We're poised. Let's do it. But that's obviously not correct. You know what I mean? How are you supposed to know?
How fringe are our beliefs is really the question, right? Like, I don't know how we could even ascertain how much of what we're saying is amenable to the regular person. I don't know. I've been conflicted recently. Like, I kind of used to feel like that these were things that everyone would agree with as long as they looked at it. But I don't know if, like, the grand scale project of communism is something that can be accepted at face value for the average person. I think it requires a little more work than that, you know?
Yeah, I think that that's true. I think if you, I don't know that cherry pick is the right word.
You have to hook them with something.
Yeah, but if you, there are elements, there are pieces of it that I think, generally speaking, the majority of people would overwhelmingly agree with.
Yeah.
But I think that comes back to the programming, the indoctrination. Once you start talking about it as a part of a centralized state apparatus that is acting in the, for the dictatorship of the proletariat, they're going to be like, sounds like it's coming straight out of Stalin's mouth. You know what I mean? Like, they'll just be knee-jerk against it. I think that's a programming issue.
Yeah. I guess that's my big question then, is how the fuck do you deprogram them? What's the distinction between education and deprogramming, right? And I don't even necessarily like the term deprogramming. I think it's applicable here, but obviously there's overlap between education and deprogramming or de-indoctrination, whatever, but I don't think they're exactly the same. Is there a essence of deprogramming that doesn't lie within education? That was a weird way to say that, but is there deprogramming that isn't education based, right?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, I think, and I don't know how to answer it.
I wonder how much of that is even conscious. That space that you're talking about where deprogramming and education aren't necessarily overlapping in the Venn diagram. Like, I feel like that comes from an unconscious place. That's like how every Marvel movie is actually, it's really just imperialist propaganda. You know what I mean? That's an unconscious thing that we take in through the media that we consume or whatever. I wonder how much of that, quote, deprogramming that doesn't come from explicit education does come from more of an unconscious position.
There is actually a quote in here where he says that on 65, only when the masses do not want the old regime, when the rulers are unable to govern as of old, then only can revolution succeed. This truth may be expressed in other words. Revolution is impossible without an all-national crisis. So
I highlighted right before that.
a little less about the all-national crisis, so to speak, but like, I guess actually that the crisis is the answer there, where I'm saying like what bridges the gap between the consciousness and then that actual active desire. You know, I guess it's that they see the opportunity of the success of the revolution. I don't know. It's kind of shitty because it's like we have to maintain this ridiculous optimism and grow it and grow it and grow it to the point where, like a wave, he says, like a wave-like growth, you know, people will join the revolution because they see its possibility. At the same time, though, he says that there's a whole slew of people that only join because they see the revolution as something that's personally gainful to them, right? And to remove the revolution of those pseudo-revolutionists will take excruciating pain and extreme labor. So I don't know. There's something separating those two notions for me because I don't understand I don't understand where the distinction is. You know, it's the same thing, right? What compromise is admissible? It's like who's truly revolutionary here? It's not necessarily everybody in the revolution, according to Lenin, but at the same time, we need the potential to be so great that everyone then joins the revolution. Do you see how that is a little conflicting?
Yeah, I understand. He does say above that on the page that this change can be brought about in this group by the political experience of the masses only and never through propaganda alone. So it can't be a purely educational thing. It has to come from, there has to be some sort of political situation that brings them truly to the revolutionary side, but he's not really defining what that is.
So, and here's where I'm going to loop it all the way back to the election, right? The experience that then spurs the revolution, is that more likely to come from, like, I'm thinking about the people understanding that they're unable to rule and that the only choice is revolution, right? The active step, the whatever. Is that scenario more likely to come from being let down by the Democrats or being let down by the Republicans, right? Because just like I was saying earlier, you know, if a Republican is elected and then there's a failure of government, there's a crisis of government, I think people are likely to just chalk it up to Republicans, not to the system as a whole. Whereas if the same were to happen under Democrats, i.e. or e.g., maybe like the start of a war in the Middle East against our democratic principles, quote unquote, I think that scenario is more likely to generate a revolutionary energy.
I think that you're probably right about that. I think in the context of the election itself, the alternative for folks that feel that they're not represented by the Republicans and they're no longer represented by the Democrats, maybe they once felt that they were, and maybe this is even true under a democratic system, like say Harris is elected president and then we're living under her reign.
Yeah. Her iron-fisted reign.
Let's say tenure.
Yes.
We're living under a Harris presidency, but then things are still going poorly. I don't think people's knee-jerk reaction is toward revolution. I think that they think, well, we have no option then. There's still there's a gap that needs to be filled before they see that as revolutionary potential, and more where they just
Yeah.
feel disillusioned with politics, not seeing the way forward.
I agree, and I think that that's where the organization comes into play.
Yeah.
You know, it's bridging that gap.
I think something as incendiary as a war in the Middle East, though, like going to war with Iran, does have more revolutionary potential in the sense that it's going to like activate the masses.
Yeah. Well, you see, yeah, that's the thing, though, right? Because if Trump was like, we're going to war with Iran, yeah, there'd be a huge reaction. But I think
That's what happened under Bush.
I think it would be like a pussy hat reaction,
Yeah.
you know? I think it would be it would be dog shit, you know? And I also don't even necessarily think it would bring active change. Not that I'm saying the same kind of protests under Harris would bring real change, but yeah.
Speaking of the election, I had one other question, which isn't, it was just a question I was left with after reading this. Going into this, thinking about the election, the forthcoming election in the United States, I was reading this with that as my kind of vantage.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think when I was done, I felt the question that still lingered in my mind is, what does party parliamentarism look like under repressive U.S. law? Like, my takeaway from this is that Lenin is saying we need a revolutionary party that can participate in parliamentary politics. So we need to, basically, that's one of the ways that we're going to bring education to the masses, is by bringing a viable candidate into a bourgeois system so they can speak to the failures of this bourgeois system.
Yeah.
But as was already outlined, the United States does not have free elections, in the sense that you don't get to choose for whom you vote in a meaningful way. They're being repressed. Stein is still fighting in Georgia, was recently fighting in Ohio, and there are other states as well, to even be on the ballot.
Same with the PSL candidates.
Yep. If that is the takeaway, if my interpretation of Lenin's ultimate point is right, that we need party representation in parliamentarism, what does that even look like in the modern United States?
The fucking red zones, man. That's what I'm saying, dude. We need to find the lowest turnout election and start putting cadres into each and every one. I need a communist water commissioner. I need a communist
comptroller.
Yeah, exactly. I need a communist agricultural guy. I need all of those guys to be commies, okay? It doesn't matter if the fucking governor is some dipshit, right? I need every single person along the way to be one of us. Because I don't even think I wrote this down in my notes, but I'm pretty sure he says in here that it's like the more important thing is to participate in elections where your victory is certain, you know, where you can in fact win. Why are we talking about the presidential election? Who gives a shit about that? I'm talking about the 560 vote election that we're having in, like, you know, this county. Right? Like, that's the kind of thing that we could actually affect change into. And it also goes hand in hand with our political program, right? To show that the current system is not adequate to meet the demands of the people.
Yeah, I think that's a common criticism lobbed against the Green Party in particular, is that they don't have enough organization to put meaningful candidates into elections that they could win, like at the local level. The only Green Party candidates that have found any office tend to be on city councils and shit like that, because those are winnable elections, so to speak. I
mean, that's a place where I can give DSA some credence, man, is that they will absolutely put forth candidates for small and local elections, and they will win them, you know? Something about the PSL presidential candidate feels so performative to me. Like, they just want you to, like, the slogan of, like, vote socialist is, it's meant to be inflammatory, right? It's meant to be controversial. It's not meant to say anything principled. It's just meant as, like, this oppositional thing, like, you know, just vote socialist instead, you know. And I don't know if I fuck with it. Like, and I don't know too much about their campaign or what they're advocating for or whatever. I'm sure, being PSL candidates, they are in line with what we want. Yeah. But I don't know the value of running that candidate at all, you know, especially if they're going to get 6,000 votes and then fucking, you know, they won't even show up on the CBS listing or whatever, you know?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that is an open question, and perhaps a valid point for organization around getting, what does it look like to get viable socialists into elections they can win?
This is not a huge city, right? And I'm not saying we could organize 1,200 people or whatever to vote in a local election in a block. Maybe that's not even legal, thinking about the illegal work. But damn, that was something that my buddies and I would talk about in college as a joke. We were like, how many gangs are in Atlanta? That's like
That's the Rainbow Coalition.
That's dude. But I'm saying, like, the reason we thought that is because, like, they have a disciplined hierarchy, right? If the boss says vote for this person, then you're not going to fucking question them. I mean, some people might, but whatever. Like, how many of those people do you need to coordinate before you can actually win an election? Because all you need to do is win, right? And then you're in.
You still are coming face to face with the apparatus, and
sure,
but
yeah, but still, there's something there.
Yeah, it's not nothing. That's what the communist comptroller can and should do.
Yes, but he needs an organization behind him. I can't just go and be the communist comptroller and get anything done. I need a group of people that are then going to go, our communist comptroller is busting his ass out here to comptrol. And
to comptrol.
I don't know what a comptroller does.
They're a fucking accountant.
It just sounds like controller. Anyway, what are we reading next? What are we reading next, Aaron?
Well, hold on. We got
okay.
So that was Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder by Vladimir Lenin.
Should you read this?
Yeah.
I think so too.
I mean, I'm going to be hard pressed at this point to find anything Lenin has written that I think you shouldn't read, just because at the end of the day, it's at least an enjoyable read.
Yes.
Because he knows how to write. But also, I think he has interesting little nuggets that aren't even necessarily the main thesis of the work that he still throws in that I think are valuable.
There's so much from his own experience that is brought to this writing, obviously, but like that's the key. And it's also, I mean, like I totally see why people read the miscellanies, like they're reading the little letters, because it's exactly those little things that are speaking to them.
Yeah. And I will again warn us against any form of idolatry of like figures in general. I don't like the idea of putting Lenin on some sort of pedestal or whatever. But I like everything that he said so far.
So far, so good, Lenin. Yeah. So far, so good.
So yeah, definitely would read. What do you think, listener?
How did you like it? What did you agree with? What did we miss, right? Are we idiots? You can let us know.
Who's right? Will or I?
That's
about
right.
The ultimate interpretation of this text.
Yes. Is Lenin saying vote blue no matter who? Obviously not.
Should be vote blue no matter whom also. Not to...
You've already done this on the podcast. You've already done this. Anyway, you can let us know all of the above things at leftunreadfeedback@gmail.com.
Yes. Also, check out our TikTok. Will has been very diligent about putting together fun TikToks with segments from the show.
You can follow us there. It's left.unread,
Yeah, please do. So, what are we going to read next?
Next, I think we're going to read a little bit of Stalin.
Yeah, so... We've read enough Trotsky at this point to approach the antithesis. We've read the thesis, now the antithesis. We're going to read Dialectical and Historical Materialism by the man of steel himself, Joseph Stalin.
That's right, ladies and gents. We're full synthesis communists. Every kind of communist, that's one we'll stand, and that means we're reading Stalin. So this is like up on the list. When people recommend Stalin's theoretical writings, this is the one. As Trotsky said, perhaps it will be like chewing coarse linen, right? Or rough straw, something along those lines, but we'll see.
Yeah, we did also both buy the Essential Stalin Major Theoretical Writings, 1905 to 1952. So if this one goes well, I think we've got a lot of Stalin in our future.
That's right. And if not, I think it's still interesting to have. I already kind of thumbed through it a little bit.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
There seems to be two very interesting and long introductions that I thought about reading. This is actually only like 30 pages long, so I still might read the introduction here for our next one, too.
Sure.
Just to help deprogram some of the anti-Stalin indoctrination that I know I've fallen victim to.
I think that's probably one thing I heard when I was looking at what's kind of around the Stalin collection is that Bruce Franklin is anti-Stalin. And he has collected this to try and maybe point towards how the Maoist methods have tried to rectify some of the Stalinist issues. Maybe. So that'll be interesting. Hopefully that's true. Hopefully that's the case.
So it ought to be a fun one.
Yeah.
Join us, please.
Yeah.
Don't find yourself left unread.
Don't get left unread.
Bye.
The American Communist Party? Yeah. Those guys are fucking grifters.
Yeah.
Yeah, those guys are fucking grifters. Yeah, they're fucking nosballs. Very stupid.